Look closely at the brushstrokes of a medieval painting, the intricate folds of a saint's robe, the delicate petals of a flower tucked into the background, even the way light catches a golden halo. At first glance, these details might seem like mere decoration, but what if they were something far more profound, hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of these ancient masterpieces? Are symbols codes left behind by artists who lived centuries ago? Take the Ghent Altarpiece, for example. This towering work of art, bathed in luminous colors, is more than just a religious scene. It's a puzzle, a whispered message from the past waiting to be decoded. And it's not alone. Across medieval Europe, artists embedded secrets into their work, secrets about faith, power, and even rebellion. Why would they do this? Imagine living in a time when expressing certain ideas could be dangerous. The church and nobility held immense control, and not every thought could be spoken aloud. But art could speak in whispers. A carefully placed lily might symbolize purity, while a hidden dagger could hint at betrayal. Even the colors held meaning: gold for divinity, red for sacrifice, blue for heavenly grace. These weren't just creative choices, they were a language, a way for artists to communicate truths they couldn't say outright. And today, we're standing on the threshold of unlocking them. This video is a journey into that hidden world. Together, we'll peel back the layers of some of history's most stunning works, uncovering the symbols that have been overlooked for centuries. You'll see how a simple apple can carry the weight of sin, how a seemingly innocent lamb might hold the key to a political scandal, and how the positioning of hands can reveal entire stories lost to time. By the end, you'll never look at medieval art the same way again. So lean in, because these masterpieces are about to speak, and what they have to say will astonish you. Consider the weight of living in an age where even the wrong word could cost you everything. Medieval Europe was a world rigidly controlled by the church and crown, where open dissent could mean exile or worse. Yet creativity finds a way. Artists of the time weren't just decorators, they were storytellers, philosophers, even rebels, armed not with swords but with symbolism. A splash of red here, a peculiar animal tucked into a corner there, these weren't accidents. They were deliberate acts of quiet defiance, a way to preserve truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Take the humble snail. In many illuminated manuscripts, you'll find them crawling along the margins, seemingly out of place. But scholars now believe these tiny creatures symbolize the Lombards, a group reviled for their supposed greed. By painting snails into religious texts, artists could critique moneylenders without directly challenging the church's authority. Similarly, the pelican, often shown piercing its own breast to feed its young, became a covert emblem of Christ's sacrifice, a way to keep faith alive during periods of persecution. Even plants carried hidden meanings. The strawberry, with its three-part leaf, subtly evoked the Holy Trinity, offering coded comfort to those practicing forbidden beliefs. But symbols weren't just tools of resistance, they were also vessels of forbidden knowledge. Alchemists and mystics used art to preserve secrets that couldn't be written down. The mysterious green man, a face woven from leaves and vines, appears in cathedral carvings across Europe. Some believe he represents pagan survival under Christian rule, while others see him as a symbol of rebirth, a nod to esoteric traditions that flourished in the shadows. Even the positioning of figures held meaning. A saint pointing to a specific star might hint at celestial events or perhaps directions to hidden texts. Every brushstroke could be a breadcrumb, leading the initiated to deeper understanding. This wasn't mere paranoia. Books were burned, heretics silenced, and entire movements erased. Yet in the quiet language of symbols, ideas survived. A painter could encode a radical thought in the drape of a robe or the tilt of a halo, knowing that those with eyes to see would understand. Today, as we uncover these layers, we're not just decoding art, we're hearing whispers across time, voices that refuse to be silenced. And that's the true power of a hidden symbol. It's not just what it represents, but the audacity of its existence, a defiant act of hope that someone someday would look closely enough to listen. Among the most enduring symbols in medieval art, the lily stands out, a slender white bloom often cradled in the hands of the Virgin Mary or archangels. Its origins trace back to ancient associations with purity, but in medieval Europe it took on deeper resonance. Artists didn't just paint lilies for their beauty, they used them to signal divine favor, often placing them near figures deemed morally untarnished. Look closely at depictions of the Annunciation, and you'll notice Gabriel holding one, a silent proclamation of Mary's innocence. But here's the twist: the lily's 3 petals weren't just decorative. To the initiated, they echoed the Holy Trinity, a subtle nod to theological complexity hidden within apparent simplicity. Then there's the pelican, a creature that seems out of place in religious art until you know its legend. Medieval bestiaries told of a bird so devoted to its young that it would pierce its own breast to feed them blood, a startling metaphor for Christ's sacrifice on the cross. Painters seized this imagery, embedding pelicans in altarpieces and stained glass. In the Hereford Mapper Mundi, one even appears atop a crucifix, its blood dripping into the mouths of its chicks. This wasn't just artistry, it was visual theology, a way to make abstract doctrines visceral. For illiterate congregations, these symbols were sermons in pigment, teaching through stories etched in color and form. Perhaps no symbol is more enigmatic than the unicorn. Today, we associate it with fantasy, but medieval artists depicted it as a paradoxical blend of ferocity and gentleness, often shown tamed only by a virgin's touch. Tapestries like The Hunt of the Unicorn weave this myth into elaborate allegories, where the creature's capture and resurrection mirror Christ's passion. But dig deeper, and the unicorn's horn, believed to purify water, hints at another layer, a medieval antidote to poison, a metaphor for spiritual cleansing. Even its white coat wasn't arbitrary, it echoed the purity of the Virgin, tying natural symbolism to sacred narrative. What's fascinating is how these motifs traveled. A pelican in an English manuscript might share meaning with one in a French cathedral, a testament to the interconnectedness of medieval Europe's visual language. Yet regional twists abounded. In Italy, the lily doubled as a political emblem for Florence, while in Germany, unicorns sometimes bore darker connotations linked to alchemical secrets. This adaptability made symbols powerful. They could convey universal truths while whispering local secrets. And that's the heart of medieval symbolism, a language without borders, yet endlessly personal, where every brushstroke could speak volumes to those who knew how to listen. Color in medieval art wasn't just a visual choice, it was a secret language. Take gold, for instance. When you see it gleaming in a medieval painting, shimmering across halos or the edges of sacred robes, it's not just about opulence. Gold represented the divine itself, the unearthly light of heaven. Artists used real gold leaf to create this effect, crafting luminous surfaces that would catch candlelight in churches, making saints and angels appear to glow from within. Look at the Lindisfarne Gospels, where gold swirls around the words of Scripture, as if the very text were infused with celestial power. This wasn't decoration, it was a deliberate signal to viewers that they were witnessing something beyond mortal understanding. Then there's blue, a color so rare and costly it became synonymous with heavenly grace. Ultramarine, the richest shade, was made from crushed lapis lazuli mined in distant Afghanistan, a pigment so precious it often cost more than gold. When medieval artists reserved this blue for the Virgin Mary's robes, as in the Wilton diptych, they weren't just showcasing wealth, they were marking her as a bridge between earth and heaven. Even the depth of the hue carried meaning. Darker blues symbolized the vast, unknowable mysteries of faith, while lighter tones hinted at divine mercy. In stained glass windows, like those of Chartres Cathedral, blue glass transformed sunlight into ethereal radiance, bathing worshippers in a literal aura of sacred light. Red, by contrast, pulsed with duality. On one hand, it symbolized the fiery love of God, the tongues of flame at Pentecost, but dip a brush in red and you could also paint martyrdom, the blood of saints spilled for their faith. In the tres riches juras duducta beri, St. Lawrence's red robes subtly foreshadow his grisly fate on a gridiron, while the scarlet of Christ's wounds in crucifixion scenes served as visceral reminders of sacrifice. Yet red could also denote power. Kings and cardinals wore it as a mark of authority, a visual claim to divine sanction for their rule. Green held its own secrets. Unlike the celestial tones of gold and blue, green anchored art to the earthy and ephemeral. It represented life's cyclical nature, spring's renewal, the fleeting beauty of youth. In the unicorn tapestries, emerald foliage teems around the mythical beast, symbolizing both paradise and the fragility of existence. But green had a shadow side too. Mixed with gray, it could signal decay or even moral corruption, as in depictions of envy or ill-fated lovers. A stained glass window in Canterbury Cathedral shows Adam and Eve surrounded by lush greenery, a poignant reminder of the paradise they would lose. What's astonishing is how consistently these meanings traveled across mediums and borders. Whether in the jewel-toned pages of a French manuscript or the towering windows of a German cathedral, colors spoke a unified visual dialect. But artists also played with expectations. A saint clothed in green might carry unexpected vitality, while a heavenly figure edged in red could hint at divine judgment. These weren't random choices, they were calculated layers of meaning waiting to be read like a map to the medieval mind. And for those who knew the code, every hue became a verse in a silent hymn, one we're only now learning to hear in full. Medieval artists didn't just paint animals, they gave them starring roles in a visual drama where every creature carried hidden meaning. Take the lamb, one of the most potent symbols in Christian art. It wasn't merely a soft, innocent figure, it was Christ himself, the Agnus Dei, or Lamb of God. In illuminated manuscripts like the Book of Kells, you'll find lambs haloed and triumphant, often holding banners of victory. Their white fleece symbolized purity, while their gentle posture mirrored Christ's sacrifice. But in carvings adorning cathedrals like Notre Dame, lambs took on even darker undertones bound by the feet, echoing the binding of Isaac, a foreshadowing of crucifixion. This wasn't just artistry, it was theology in wool and stone. Then there's the peacock strutting through mosaics and tapestries with its iridescent feathers fanned wide. To modern eyes, it might seem like mere decoration, but medieval viewers saw immortality in those dazzling hues. Ancient belief held that peacock flesh never decayed, making the bird a living emblem of resurrection. In church carvings, peacocks often flanked the tree of life, their feathers, eyes staring heavenward as if guarding divine secrets. Even in death, they whispered hope. Peacock motifs adorned tombs, a promise that the soul, like those unchanging feathers, would endure beyond the grave. But not all animal symbols were so noble. The fox, with its sly grin and cunning eyes, became medieval art's ultimate trickster. Bestiaries depicted it playing dead to lure unsuspecting birds, a clear metaphor for deceit. In carvings like those at Vézelay Abbey, foxes sometimes wore monks' robes, a biting satire of corrupt clergy exploiting the faithful. Even its color mattered. Red foxes symbolized the devil, their fiery coats mirroring hell's flames. Yet the fox wasn't just a villain. In some regional tales, it outsmarted hunters, becoming a folk hero for the oppressed. This duality made it endlessly useful to artists who needed to critique authority without saying a word. Lesser-known creatures held equally layered meanings. The owl, for instance, wasn't just wise, it was ominous. Perched in the margins of manuscripts, its wide eyes signaled night's dangers, a warning against spiritual blindness. Bats, often clutched by demons in frescoes, embodied the chaos of the unseen world. Even the humble hare, frequently painted fleeing hounds, could represent the human soul pursued by sin. What's striking is how these symbols transcended geography. A lamb in an English psalter carried the same weight as one in a Spanish altarpiece, while a fox carved into a French choir stall would be instantly recognizable to a German monk. Yet local flavors crept in. In alpine regions, bears symbolized strength and protection, while Italian artists favored the griffin, part eagle, part lion, as a guardian of sacred spaces. This shared visual language united medieval Europe, allowing a single image to speak across languages and borders. But here's the real genius: these symbols weren't static. An artist could tweak a detail, a lamb with a wounded leg, a peacock with closed feathers, to shift the meaning entirely. A fox holding a scroll might mock hypocrisy, while one fleeing a hunter could celebrate cleverness. This flexibility let artists navigate censorship, embedding layers of interpretation that only the initiated could fully unravel. And that's the heart of medieval animal symbolism. It wasn't just about what you saw, but what you were meant to understand. Flowers and plants in medieval art were never just background filler, they were silent messengers, each petal and leaf loaded with meaning. Take the rose, a bloom we often associate with romance today. In medieval times, its layers held a far deeper significance. The five-petaled wild rose, especially when painted white or red, became a direct emblem of the Virgin Mary, her purity, unfolding like the flower's delicate spiral. In the Rothschild Canticles, a 14th-century devotional book, Mary is often framed by roses, their thorns subtly referencing the rose without thorns, a metaphor for her sinless nature. But the rose's symbolism didn't stop there. Its red hue echoed Christ's blood, while its fleeting beauty reminded viewers of life's transience. Even the way it grew, reaching upward despite its thorns, hinted at spiritual ascent through suffering. Then there's the oak, a tree so towering it became the ultimate medieval symbol of endurance. Its gnarled branches and deep roots represented unshakable faith, often depicted in carvings of saints or kings to underscore their divine right. In the Bayeux Tapestry, oak leaves border scenes of William the Conqueror's triumph, a quiet declaration of Norman strength. But the oak's acorns carried their own message: small beginnings with mighty potential, a nod to parables like the mustard seed. Artists even played with its seasonal changes. Bare winter oaks symbolized martyrdom, while summer foliage signaled resurrection. Few plants carried as much paradox as the thistle. Spiky and unwelcoming, it became shorthand for Christ's suffering, its prickles mirroring the crown of thorns. In the Tres Riches Juras, a thistle springs from barren soil near the crucifixion scene, a stark reminder of pain's inevitability. Yet in Scottish art, the same plant flipped into a badge of defiance, its toughness celebrated in heraldry as a national emblem. This duality was classic medieval thinking. Even the humblest weed could embody both agony and resilience. Nowhere is floral symbolism more lavish than in the Book of Kells. Its pages burst with intricate vinework where clovers intertwine with grapes and lilies. These aren't random decorations. The clover's 3 leaves whisper the Trinity, while grapevines twisting around letters evoke the Eucharist's sacramental wine. Even the colors telegraph meaning: purple flowers for penitence, green for renewal. Zoom in, and you'll spot insects hiding among the petals, a playful nod to the soul's fragility amid life's temptations. What's remarkable is how these symbols transcended art forms. A rose carved into a cathedral's tympanum carried the same weight as one stitched into a noblewoman's tapestry. Regional twists abounded too. In Mediterranean art, olive branches signaled peace, while northern artists favored hardy holly for its evergreen hope. This wasn't just botany, it was a visual dialect, one where a single sprout could convey entire chapters of scripture or slices of human experience. And for medieval viewers, these weren't hidden codes at all, but a living language as vivid and immediate as a sermon in bloom. Step inside a medieval cathedral, and you're not just entering a building, you're walking into a 3-dimensional symbol. Every arch, every stained glass panel, even the floor beneath your feet was meticulously designed to tell a sacred story. Take the labyrinth, those intricate circular patterns inlaid into cathedral floors like the one at Chartres. At first glance, they might resemble a decorative maze, but follow their winding path and you're retracing a spiritual journey. Pilgrims who couldn't travel to Jerusalem would walk these labyrinths on their knees, their physical struggle mirroring the soul's arduous path to salvation. The very act of navigating those twists and turns became a meditation, a tangible expression of faith where every step held meaning. Now look up. The rose window, that radiant wheel of stained glass found in cathedrals like Notre Dame de Paris, wasn't just a feat of engineering, it was cosmology in color and light. Its circular form echoed the perfection of divine order, with radiating spokes representing the harmony of creation. At Notre Dame, the north rose window bursts with blue and red glass, its panels illustrating the Old Testament prophets surrounding the Virgin Mary. But here's the genius: when sunlight streams through, the entire nave floods with jewel-toned light, transforming the church into a microcosm of heaven itself. This wasn't mere decoration, it was theological theater designed to make the invisible visible. Even the cathedral's layout whispered secrets. The cruciform floor plan, shaped like a cross, turned the building into a literal embodiment of Christ's sacrifice. Enter through the west door, often carved with scenes of the Last Judgment, and you'd walk toward the illuminated east end, symbolizing humanity's journey from sin to redemption. The soaring height of the nave, a deliberate reach toward the divine, forcing eyes and hearts upward. At Amiens Cathedral, the vaults stretch so high they seem to dissolve into light, a physical manifestation of transcendence. Then there are the grotesques and gargoyles clinging to the rooftops. While some served as drainage spouts, others were far more symbolic. Hybrid creatures, part eagle, part lion, part human, guarded sacred spaces, warding off evil spirits with their unsettling presence. Notre Dame's famous Strige gargoyle, perched pensively above Paris, isn't just a fanciful sculpture. It's a medieval memento mori, reminding viewers of life's fleeting nature. The true mastery of these designs lies in their layering. A peasant and a scholar could stand in the same cathedral and read different depths of meaning. One might see the rose window's beauty, while another decoded its intricate typology linking Old and New Testaments. This was architecture as scripture, where every element conspired to elevate the mundane into the sacred. And though time has worn some of these symbols smooth, their power remains. When sunlight still pours through those ancient windows, painting the stones with stories, it's as if the stones themselves are whispering. 7 centuries later, the message endures. Run your finger along the edge of an illuminated manuscript or trace the lines of a cathedral's rose window, and you'll feel it, the precision of geometry, not as cold calculation but as sacred rhythm. Medieval artists didn't just stumble upon these patterns. They wielded them like prayers, believing circles, squares, and interlocking knots could mirror the divine order of the cosmos. Take the mandala-like designs adorning the pages of the Lindisfarne Gospels. These aren't mere decorations, they're miniature universes, concentric circles radiating from a central point like ripples in a celestial pond. To the medieval mind, the circle was perfection, no beginning, no end, a shape echoing God's eternal nature. When you see these designs framing biblical scenes, you're glimpsing an artist's attempt to contain infinity within parchment. Now shift your gaze to the dizzying interlace patterns of the Book of Kells, where ribbons of color twist and knot in impossible complexity. At first glance, they might seem like artistic flourishes, but look closer. These endless loops, where no strand truly begins or ends, were deliberate metaphors for eternity. A single thread might vanish beneath another, only to reemerge pages later, mirroring the soul's journey beyond time. And here's the twist: many of these motifs weren't purely Christian. Islamic artisans, forbidden from depicting human forms, had perfected geometric artistry centuries earlier. When crusaders and traders brought back silks and metalwork from the East, European artists adapted these designs, infusing them with Christian symbolism. The Alhambra's arabesques and Lincoln Cathedral's carved vines share a visual DNA proof that sacred geometry transcended faiths. Even the humble quincunx, a pattern of 5 dots forming a cross, held profound meaning. Found in everything from cathedral floor plans to manuscript margins, it represented the 5 wounds of Christ while subtly invoking the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water, unified by the divine 5th point. In the Vienna Genesis, a 6th century purple-dyed Bible, this very pattern frames scenes of redemption, binding theology to mathematics, but geometry's magic didn't stop at ornamentation. Medieval architects used the golden ratio, a mathematical proportion believed to reflect divine harmony, to shape entire cathedrals. Chartres' nave and Rheims' facade aligned to these exacting measurements, creating spaces where the human eye instinctively senses balance. Step inside, and the vaulted ceilings form perfect quadripartite divisions, mirroring the 4 Gospels supporting the heavens. What's haunting is how these patterns still resonate. When you lose yourself in the hypnotic spirals of a Celtic cross or the fractal-like repetition of a Gothic rose window, you're not just seeing art, you're feeling an ancient longing to map the sacred, to find order in chaos. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of medieval geometry. It wasn't about rigid rules, but about revealing the hidden music of the universe, one perfectly proportioned line at a time. Walk through the shadowed aisles of a Gothic cathedral, and you might feel eyes upon you, not from the saints in stained glass, but from the walls themselves. Peering out from capitals and choir stalls, half hidden in tangles of stone foliage, are faces. Some grin, some grimace, others stare blankly into eternity. These aren't random decorations, they're part of an ancient tradition of concealment, where human likenesses lurk in the very architecture meant to glorify the divine. The most famous of these is the Green Man, his leafy visage sprouting vines from mouth and ears, appearing in churches from Germany to England, but he's just the beginning. Take the wooden misericords, those tiny seats tucked beneath choir stalls where clergy rested during long services. Flip them up and you'll discover a secret world carved beneath. Faces of townsfolk, scowling nobles, even bawdy scenes of peasants mid-dance. At Lincoln Cathedral, one misericord hides a grinning fox preaching to a flock of geese, a sly dig at corrupt priests. These weren't just whimsy, they were subversion in plain sight. Artisans, often anonymous, smuggled critiques of power into sacred spaces, knowing the church's leaders would rarely stoop to inspect seating. Then there are the babuins, those grotesque hybrids of human and beast adorning roof bosses and corbels. At Norwich Cathedral, a stone face dissolves into oak leaves mid-scream, as if the man is becoming the forest. Some scholars argue these represent pagan spirits Christianized into decor, while others see them as metaphors for untamed human nature. Either way, their dual identity, part man, part nature, mirrored medieval anxieties about civilization's thin veneer, but not all hidden faces were symbolic. In the Basilica of St. Denis, delicate stone ivy curls around the edges of tombs, and if you follow each tendril, you'll find miniature portraits of the craftsmen who built them. These weren't signatures, but silent claims of authorship in an era when artists rarely got credit. Even patrons snuck into the scenery. At Chartres, a wealthy donor's face peers from a stained glass border, his features tiny but unmistakable, a medieval equivalent of photobombing the divine. What's mesmerizing is how these faces change with perspective. Step back and the Green Man blends into foliage, lean in and his eyes lock onto yours. This duality, seen and unseen, captures the medieval mindset perfectly. A world where nothing was ever just what it seemed, where every leaf might whisper and every shadow held a story. And perhaps that's why these hidden faces still captivate us. They're reminders that even in spaces designed to elevate the sacred, the human persists irreverent, inventive, and endlessly surprising. In the margins of medieval manuscripts, where you might expect to find doodles or decorative vines, something far stranger often lurks. A snake swallowing its own tail, a lone toad perched on a sunburst, or a king dissolving into liquid gold. These weren't idle sketches, they were the clandestine language of alchemists, a visual code hiding in plain sight. Take the Ouroboros, that ancient symbol of a serpent eating itself. To the untrained eye, it might seem like a simple representation of cycles, birth, death, and rebirth. But for alchemists, it whispered something far more radical. The idea that matter could be infinitely transformed, that base metals might be refined into gold, just as the soul could ascend to perfection. You'll find it coiled in the margins of texts like the Aurora Consurgens, its endless loop a silent promise that nothing in the universe was truly fixed. Then there's the Philosopher's Stone, the holy grail of alchemy, often depicted not as a literal gem but as a humble red lion or a crowned hermaphrodite. In the Ripley Scrolls, a series of cryptic illustrations tracing alchemical processes, the stone appears as a winged infant emerging from a fiery flask, a metaphor for the purified substance believed to grant immortality. But here's the catch, these images weren't just symbolic, they were practical. Alchemists working in hidden workshops used them as mnemonics, a way to encode recipes without attracting the attention of church authorities. A tapestry in the Cloisters Museum shows a woman distilling liquids while a phoenix rises behind her. To most, it's a moral lesson about resurrection. To initiates, it's a step-by-step guide to distillation, with the phoenix's rebirth symbolizing the purification of matter. Even everyday creatures became alchemical ciphers. The toad, often shown vomiting jewels or swallowing the moon, represented the primal matter of creation, the chaotic base from which perfection could emerge. In the Splendor Solis manuscripts, toads sit atop golden orbs, their venomous skins symbolizing the poisonous impurities that must be purged to reveal the gold within. Similarly, the pelican, a bird revered in Christian art for its sacrifice, took on a second meaning for alchemists. When painted piercing its breast to feed its young with blood, it wasn't just Christ's sacrifice being invoked, it was the alchemical process of circulation, where liquids are repeatedly distilled to achieve purity. But perhaps the most audacious symbols were those hidden in plain sight. A rose window in a cathedral might secretly map the stages of the great work, the alchemical path to enlightenment, with its petals corresponding to stages of dissolution and coagulation. A seemingly innocent garden seen in a tapestry could conceal the hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden representing the sealed vessel where transformations occurred. Even colors held double meanings. Black wasn't just the absence of light, but the negrido phase of decay, the necessary darkness before rebirth. What's fascinating is how these symbols straddled worlds. A monk illuminating a manuscript might weave alchemical imagery into a biblical scene, knowing fellow adepts would recognize it while the uninitiated saw only piety. This duality kept alchemy alive during crackdowns, its secrets preserved not in locked chests but in the very art that adorned churches and castles. And that's the genius of these symbols, they weren't just hiding. They were waiting, certain that someday someone would look closely enough to understand. In the margins of the Luttrell Psalter, amid pages of sacred text, a curious scene unfolds. A fox in priest's robe stands at a pulpit, preaching to a flock of geese. At first glance, it might seem like whimsy, an artist's playful diversion, but look closer. This wasn't just doodling, it was defiance. Medieval artists, living under the watchful eyes of kings and bishops, couldn't openly criticize corruption. So they smuggled their critiques into the margins, using animals as stand-ins for human folly. The fox, long a symbol of cunning deception, became a biting satire of greedy clergy exploiting their congregations. The geese, those were the gullible faithful, their wide eyes and open beaks mocking blind obedience. This visual rebellion wasn't isolated. Across Europe, artists turned bestiary symbols into political weapons. A donkey crowned like a king, its ears drooping foolishly, might represent a ruler's incompetence. In the Smithfield Decretals, a wolf in judge's robes presides over a courtroom, its sharp teeth bared in a grotesque parody of justice. Even the humble snail took on new meaning. Some scholars argue its slow, relentless march symbolized the crushing weight of taxes, a silent protest against feudal oppression. These images thrived in the margins precisely because they were easy to dismiss as nonsense, but to those who understood the code, they were anything but trivial. The Luttrell Psalter is especially rich with these subversive gems. Between its gilded prayers, you'll find a knight jousting against a snail, his lance splintered against the creature's shell. Is this just medieval slapstick? Far from it. The snail, often linked to the Lombards, a group reviled as moneylenders, transforms into a metaphor for the church's financial stranglehold. The knight's futile struggle mirrors the frustration of those trapped beneath systemic greed. Elsewhere, a rabbit, typically a symbol of cowardice, brandishes a sword and chases a hunting dog, a cheeky role reversal that upends the social order, if only on parchment. What's striking is how these symbols traveled. A fox preaching in an English psalter might appear alongside a wolf judge in a French manuscript, proof of a shared visual language of dissent. Regional flavors crept in too. In German artworks, bears symbols of brute strength often represented oppressive nobility, while Italian marginalia favored monkeys, their mimicry skewering the vanity of the elite. The beauty of this system was its deniability. If challenged, an artist could simply claim, "It's just a funny animal story," but the message lingered like a whisper in the ear of those who knew how to listen. Perhaps no symbol was as potent as the hybrid creature, part human, part beast, carved into choir stalls or painted on vaulted ceilings. These grotesques, with their human eyes and animal bodies, embodied the fear that those in power were masks away from monstrosity. At Exeter Cathedral, a stone corbel shows a bishop with a wolf's head, his mitre perched precariously atop fur-covered ears. It's a chilling reminder that authority, unchecked, could shed its humanity. These images weren't just medieval memes, they were survival tactics. In an era when speaking out could mean imprisonment or worse, art became the safest megaphone. And though the Luttrell Psalter's foxes and snails might seem quaint today, their legacy is potent. They remind us that symbols, when wielded with precision, can outlast empires, quiet, persistent, and sharp enough to draw blood. High above the nave of Chartres Cathedral, where most eyes linger on the famous blue glass, an unusual carving hides in plain sight a woman holding a book and chalice, her gown swirling with patterns that curl like flames. To the casual observer, she might just be another saint, but those who know the suppressed history of the Cathars recognize her instantly, the perfecti, the spiritual elite of this persecuted sect. This isn't an accident. It's a whisper from the shadows, a defiant echo of beliefs the church tried to erase. The Cathars, branded as heretics for their dualist view of the material world as corrupt, were hunted to near extinction during the Albigensian Crusade. Yet their symbols stubbornly survived, woven into the very fabric of Orthodox art. Look closely at Chartres' south porch, and you'll find more clues, a mysterious green stone set into the floor, said to mark the spot where Cathar sympathizers once gathered. Even the cathedral's famed labyrinth, a spiritual path for pilgrims, mirrors the circular initiation rites of Cathar perfecti. How did these references escape destruction? Some scholars believe sympathetic Masons, perhaps even those who'd lost family to the Crusades, embedded them deliberately, knowing only the initiated would understand. Gnostic influences, equally dangerous to medieval orthodoxy, left their own traces. In a fresco hidden in a remote Italian chapel, Christ doesn't hang suffering on the cross. He stands triumphantly before it, his hand raised in blessing. This subtle detail aligns with Gnostic teachings that viewed the crucifixion as an illusion, since divine spirit could never truly be bound by matter. Similarly, the Gospel of John's cryptic phrase, "the light shines in the darkness," appears in manuscripts with unusual emphasis, the letters LVX, Latin for light, sometimes highlighted in gold. To Gnostics, light represented the trapped divine spark within humanity, a belief that got many burned at the stake. Even the humble fish, a common Christian symbol, took on heretical layers. While most saw it as a sign of Christ's miracles, underground Gnostic circles used it to represent the Pisces zodiac, believing the age of Jesus marked the dawn of a new astrological era. In the crypt of Saint Maximin in Provence, a carved fish swims amid stars, its scales forming a coded celestial map. What's chilling is how these symbols coexisted with their orthodox counterparts. A rose window's petals might celebrate the Virgin Mary while secretly mapping the Gnostic pleroma, the divine fullness from which all creation emanated. A carving of Saint Michael slaying a dragon could openly glorify church victory while covertly symbolizing the Cathar struggle against materialism. This duality wasn't just survival, it was resistance in pigment and stone. The most audacious examples lurk where you'd least expect them. In the Spanish monastery of Santa Cruz, a capital shows a monk harvesting grapes, except the grapes are human heads, their mouths open in silent screams. To some, it's a warning against heresy. To others, it's a Cathar allegory for the suffering of the pure at the hands of the church. The truth might be both. Like medieval art itself, these symbols refuse to be pinned down, their meanings shifting with the light. Perhaps that's why they endured. Burning books was easy, but scrubbing meaning from every leaf, every stone, every brushstroke, impossible, and so the whispers lingered in a chalice held just a little too prominently, in a star chart disguised as decoration, in the knowing glance of a carved saint. They remind us that faith, even when outlawed, finds ways to etch itself into history. You just have to know where to look. Perched on the rain-slicked edges of Gothic cathedrals, gargoyles crouch like frozen sentinels, their mouths agape in eternal snarls. At first glance, they seem purely functional. Those gaping jaws funnel rainwater away from delicate stone walls, preventing erosion. But look closer. Why sculpt something so unnerving to serve as a drainpipe? The answer lies in the medieval belief that ugliness could repel ugliness. These grotesque figures weren't just architectural tools, they were spiritual guardians, their twisted forms designed to ward off evil as fiercely as they diverted storms. Take the famous gargoyles of Notre Dame. One depicts a horned demon with bulging eyes, its tongue lolling out like a warning. Another shows a bat-winged creature mid-shriek, as if frozen in the act of scaring something away. This wasn't random horror. It was apotropaic magic, the ancient practice of using images to deflect harm. Medieval minds believed evil spirits could be as literal as the wind and rain, and just as destructive. By carving creatures even more terrifying than the threats they feared, architects turned cathedrals into fortresses of the sacred. The logic was simple. If a demon approached and saw its own likeness glaring back, it might flee, thinking the territory already claimed. But gargoyles carried layered meanings beyond mere fright. Some were hybrid beasts, part lion, part goat, part serpent, echoing biblical descriptions of chaos monsters like Leviathan. At Salisbury Cathedral, a gargoyle with a second face hidden in its stomach references folklore about doppelgangers and deceit. Others leaned into dark humor, like the one at Paisley Abbey in Scotland, which appears to be vomiting theatrically. A crude but effective reminder that even sacred spaces couldn't escape human irreverence. The most intriguing gargoyles are those that defy explanation. At Lyon Cathedral in France, stone oxen peer down from the towers, their placid faces utterly out of place among the usual grotesques. Local legend claims they honor the beasts who hauled materials uphill to build the church, a rare nod to the laborers history often forgets. Meanwhile, atop Freiburg Minster, a gargoyle strikes a pose eerily similar to a certain famous sci-fi alien, proving medieval artisans could out-weird even modern imaginations. What's often overlooked is how gargoyles personalize protection. Many cathedrals let artisans carve grotesques inspired by local fears, plague, wolves, even corrupt officials. A gargoyle's twisted grin might mirror the town drunk, while another's elongated limbs recalled famine victims. This hyper-local symbolism made them communal talismans, their stone faces reflecting the very people they shielded. Yet for all their ferocity, gargoyles share an unexpected fragility. Their open mouths, designed to spit water, make them vulnerable to cracking in freezing temperatures. Many originals have been replaced over centuries, their successors often gentler, less demons, more quirky characters. It's a quiet metaphor, the things we create to confront darkness inevitably weather too. But even in their decay, they endure, reminding us that fear shaped into stone can outlast the very evils it was meant to repel. A lute cradled in a saint's hands might seem like a simple prop, but in medieval art, its delicate strings vibrated with hidden meaning. This instrument wasn't just about music. It symbolized celestial harmony, the divine order of the cosmos. In Hans Memling's Angel Musicians, golden-haired angels pluck lutes and harps, their poised fingers creating an unseen melody meant to mirror the harmony of heaven itself. The very shape of the lute, with its rounded back and taut strings, echoed the medieval belief in the music of the spheres, the idea that planets moved in perfect, inaudible concert. But flip to Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights, and the same instrument takes on a sinister twist. There, a lute is thrust into the hands of a sinner, its strings broken and pegs loose, a visual pun on discord and moral decay. Wind instruments carried even sharper warnings. The shawm, a raucous ancestor of the oboe, often appeared in scenes of debauchery, its piercing sound symbolizing unrestrained desire. In Brueggel's The Wedding Dance, peasants cavort to the shrill notes of a shawm player, their flushed faces and tangled limbs embodying the chaos of unchecked passion. Even the bagpipe, innocent in modern folk music, was medieval shorthand for base instincts, its drone representing the monotonous pull of earthly temptations. A carved misericord in Bristol Cathedral shows a fox playing bagpipes while a rabbit dances, a sly commentary on how vice can lead the unwitting astray. But not all instruments were cautionary tales. The harp, with its ethereal tones, became the attribute of King David, his fingers coaxing divine psalms from its strings. In the Tres Riches Huras du Duc de Berry, David's harp glows against a celestial blue background, its triangular frame echoing the Trinity. Similarly, the organ, with its towering pipes, represented the voice of God, quite literally in some churches, where its vibrations were said to shake dust from the rafters as if heaven itself was speaking. The most intriguing examples blur the line between sacred and profane. In the Cantigas de Santa Maria, a 13th-century collection of Marian hymns, Moorish-style guitars and tambourines accompany miracles of the Virgin, their rhythmic pulses bridging Christian and Islamic musical traditions. And in the Luttrell Psalter, a grotesque hybrid creature plays a viol with its tail, a reminder that even holiness could harbor playful irreverence. What's striking is how these symbols transcended borders. A lute in a French tapestry carried the same spiritual weight as one in a German altarpiece, while a shawm's moral stain was universal. Yet regional twists emerged. Spanish artists favored the guitar for its ties to both sacred hymns and tavern songs, while English carvers often depicted trumpets as heralds of the Last Judgment. This wasn't just art, it was a silent symphony of meaning where every instrument played its part in the grand moral composition. And though the music itself has faded, the messages linger, waiting for those who know how to listen. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of medieval churches, hidden in plain sight among saints and biblical scenes, the cosmos quietly hums. Look down at the floor of San Miniato al Monte in Florence, and your feet trace the contours of an inlaid marble zodiac, each sign meticulously placed to mirror the heavens above. These celestial maps weren't decorative afterthoughts, they were theological blueprints weaving astrology into the very fabric of faith. To medieval minds, the movements of planets and stars weren't separate from divine will, they were its visible language. A manuscript calendar from 13th century England doesn't just mark feast days, it pairs each month with a zodiac sign and its corresponding labor, binding human cycles to celestial ones. The ram of March heralds spring planting, while the scales of September weigh the harvest, a reminder that even time itself was sacred geometry. The planets played starring roles too. In the Tres Riches Huras du Duc de Berry, luminous miniatures depict laborers toiling under skies dominated by planetary gods. July's page shows the sun as Apollo, his golden chariot racing across a lapis lazuli sky, while Saturn, cloaked in melancholy, presides over February's frozen landscapes. This wasn't pagan survival but calculated symbolism. Each planet governed one of the 7 liberal arts, linking astronomy to education. Saturn, slow and distant, ruled astronomy itself, his long orbit mirroring the patient study of the stars. Even the days of the week encoded this logic: Sunday for the sun, Monday for the moon, a rhythm still echoing in our calendars today. Astronomy bled into architecture with breathtaking precision. Chartres Cathedral's labyrinth isn't just a spiritual path. Its 11 concentric circles mirror the medieval model of the universe, with Earth at the center and the moon, sun, and planets rotating in perfect harmony. At certain solstices, sunlight strikes specific carvings, a 13th century light show choreographed by celestial mechanics. Similarly, the rose window at Amiens aligns with the summer sun's zenith, flooding the nave with light precisely when the zodiac outside enters Leo, the lion symbolizing Christ's triumph. But the most audacious codes lie in marginalia. A psalter from Winchester hides tiny silver stars in its borders, forming constellations that match the night sky on the feast day of the patron saint. In the Silo's Apocalypse, a comet streaks past Revelation's horrors, likely recording the real-life appearance of Halley's comet in 1066, interpreted as an omen of divine wrath. Even personal prayer books got celestial. The Hours of Catherine of Cleves includes a parchment volvel, a rotating paper dial, letting users calculate moon phases to time prayers with lunar cycles. What's revelatory is how these symbols straddled orthodoxy and occult. While church fathers condemned astrology as fortune-telling, they embraced its mathematics as proof of God's orderly design. A bishop might denounce horoscopes from the pulpit while commissioning a stained glass window where zodiac signs flank Christ in majesty. This duality reveals the medieval mind's genius. The cosmos wasn't feared but decoded, its patterns a celestial liturgy sung in the silent language of symbols. And when we stand in these spaces today, we're not just looking at art, we're stepping into an ancient observatory, where every star, every planet, every constellation was a brushstroke in a divine masterpiece. Picture this: a grinning skeleton tugs at the sleeve of an emperor, while another whisks a weeping child into a whirling dance. This is the Danse Macabre, the dance of death, a haunting motif that swept through medieval Europe in the wake of the Black Death. It wasn't mere morbid art, it was a radical equalizer, a visual sermon reminding every soul from pauper to pope that mortality plays no favorites. Nowhere is this more vivid than in Burnt Knock's Lost Lubeck fresco, a masterpiece once stretching 60 feet along a church wall. Though destroyed in World War II, its surviving fragments and copies reveal a chilling procession: skeletons leading the living by hand, their bony fingers interlaced with those of merchants, monks, and maidens alike. What made these dancing corpses so gripping? Medieval society was rigidly hierarchical. Kings ruled, peasants toiled, and the church promised an afterlife shaped by earthly status. But the Danse Macabre appended this. In Knock's work, a skeletal figure crowned with decaying flowers pulls a reluctant bishop into the dance, his mitre askew as he clutches a useless bag of gold. Nearby, a knight's sword lies broken at his feet while Death's fiddle plays an irresistible tune. The message was blatant: your titles, your wealth, your sacred vows, none spare you from the grave's embrace. The genius of these artworks lay in their dark humor. Death wasn't just a spectre, he was a prankster, a performer. In the Basel dance of death murals, skeletons mimic their partner's earthly roles. One dons a judge's wig while dragging a magistrate away mid-sentence. Another hoists a drunken monk's own wine jug to his lipless grin. This wasn't just fear-mongering, it was psychological alchemy, transforming terror into something approachable through satire. By laughing at death's antics, viewers could confront their own mortality without paralyzing dread. But the Danse Macabre wasn't just social commentary, it was spiritual triage. After the plague wiped out a third of Europe, survivors grappled with a crisis of meaning. Why pray if the devout died alongside sinners? Why pursue virtue if death came randomly? The dance answered by reframing mortality as life's great unifier, urging repentance while mocking worldly attachments. In Paris's Cemetery of the Holy Innocents, where the earliest known Danse Macabre mural once stood, skeletons whispered to passers-by, "What you are, we once were. What we are, you shall become." Even the dance's rhythm held meaning. Most frescoes showed a strict order: Pope first, Emperor next, down to the laborer, but death's grip was equally firm on all. The Lubeck fresco's original Latin verses survive, each couplet a personalized memento mori. To the merchant, your ledger's sums won't buy you time. To the mother, your infant's cries won't halt my chime. These weren't threats but invitations to live fully, humbly, with eyes wide open to life's fleeting beauty. What's haunting is how these medieval dances still resonate. When Knock painted his Lubeck masterpiece, he couldn't have known it would inspire Holbein's woodcuts, Disney's skeleton dance, even modern Halloween parades. Yet the core truth remains: death dances with us all, but the steps we choose before the music stops, that's where the artistry of living lies. Kneeling in the shadow of the Annunciation, a wealthy couple peers into the sacred scene, their finely detailed robes and solemn expressions marking them as flesh and blood interlopers in a divine moment. This is the Ghent Altarpiece's open secret. Patrons Robert de Masmines and his wife don't just commission the painting, they inhabit it, their tiny figures kneeling in the left panel as if granted VIP access to the Virgin Mary's private chamber. But why insert themselves so brazenly? In medieval Europe, commissioning religious art wasn't just an act of devotion, it was a carefully staged performance of power. By placing their likenesses amid biblical scenes, elites could perform eternal piety while subtly reminding viewers whose gold made such beauty possible. The Mayroad couple weren't alone. Across Europe, donors elbowed their way into sacred narratives with increasing audacity. In Jan van Eyck's Madonna of Chancellor Rollin, the Chancellor himself sits opposite the Virgin, their faces nearly level, an unthinkable parity for mere mortals in earlier art. His jeweled hands clutch a prayer book, but his opulent fur-lined robe steals the scene, whispering earthly wealth even as he kneels in humility, the painting's true miracle. Making a political operator look like a saint in waiting, churches became stages for this celestial name-dropping. At Bruges St. Basil's Chapel, the wealthy Adorns family built an exact replica of Jerusalem's Holy Sepulchre, then lined its walls with their portraits gazing beatifically at the crucifixion. In Florence's Brancocchi Chapel, silk merchant Felix Brancocchi appears among the crowds witnessing St. Peter's miracles, his fashionable red hat ensuring no one misses his VIP status in Salvation history. But the most ingenious portraits hid in plain sight. The Portinari altarpiece by Hugo van der Goes depicts its donor, Tommaso Portinari, as one of the shepherds at Christ's nativity, his family crest subtly stitched into a bystander's cloak. Meanwhile, the Ghent Altarpiece's patron, Jules Vade, stares out from the lower corner, his wife hovering nearby like a guardian angel. Their placement is masterful, close enough to claim proximity to holiness, but not so central as to invite accusations of blasphemy. What's fascinating is how these portraits balanced ego and etiquette. Donors might hold tiny models of the churches they funded, like the kneeling figure in Memling's Moral Triptych, presenting a miniature St. James as his ticket to heaven. Others, like the couple in the Ghent Altarpiece, appear reflected in a mirror behind the Virgin. Their presence implied rather than asserted a medieval photobomb that maintained plausible deniability. The line between piety and pride was razor thin. When Isabella of Portugal commissioned a Book of Hours showing her personally receiving the finished manuscript from the Virgin Mary, she wasn't just praying, she was reframing herself as heaven's favored client. Yet these portraits also revealed genuine anxiety about salvation in an age when death lurked around every corner. If you couldn't take your wealth to the grave, you could at least buy immortality in pigment and gold, your face forever whispering to future worshippers, remember who made this possible. The ultimate power move, the Dresden Altarpiece, where Duke Frederick the Wise appears not just as a donor, but as one of the three kings, his ermine-lined cloak blending seamlessly with the Magi's robes. It's a staggering claim, not merely witnessing the divine, but being welcomed into its inner circle. Centuries later, his gamble paid off. We're still talking about him, proof that in the economy of eternal memory, a well-placed portrait was the ultimate currency. Buried in the glowing layers of Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait, tucked between the chandelier's ornate metalwork and the convex mirror's curved reflection, sits one of art history's most tantalizing puzzles, the artist's own signature. It's not scribbled discreetly in a corner, instead it floats boldly above the mirror, declaring, Johannes de Eyck fuit hic, Jan van Eyck was here. But look closer, the letters aren't just a claim of authorship, they're positioned as if part of the room's architecture, their carefully spaced curves mimicking the mirror's circular frame. This wasn't vanity, it was a cipher, a way for Van Eyck to embed himself literally into the scene he painted, blurring the line between creator and creation. Medieval and Renaissance artists often hid monograms like buried treasure. Take Albrecht Dürer, whose famous ad insignia appears not just as a signature, but woven into wood grain, etched onto stone tablets, even carved into the fur of a rabbit in his young hair. These weren't mere branding, they were theological statements. In Dürer's Melancholia Eye, the letters ad glow atop a stone slab, positioned like a celestial seal, a nod to Anno Domini and the artist's own God-given talent. The monogram becomes both signature and sacred emblem, a whisper of divine inspiration behind human genius. Then there's Emperor Frederick Roman III enigmatic, a EIOU, a five-letter cipher that still baffles scholars. Scattered across his palaces, personal artifacts, and even the clasp of his ceremonial robes, these vowels have spawned countless interpretations. Austria ist die Imperia orbi univer, so Austria is destined to rule the world. Aquila electa est omnia vincit, the chosen eagle conquers all through justice, or perhaps something more personal, a lover's acronym or alchemical formula. The mystery itself was the point. By leaving his cipher open to interpretation, Frederick turned his identity into a riddle only the elite could attempt to solve. Monograms also served as covert rebellion. When nuns like Guda of Germany signed their illuminated manuscripts with self-portraits in the 12th century, an era when women's artistic contributions were often erased, their delicate initials became acts of defiance. Guda's tiny figure, peeking from the curve of the letter D, holds a scroll proclaiming, Guda, sinner, wrote and painted this. The humility topo's masked audacity. She ensured her name would outlast the centuries. Even materials held coded meaning. The Middleham jewel, a 15th century pendant, bears the inscription Nanny alongside sacred imagery. Was it a lover's nickname? A reference to the Virgin, Nan being medieval shorthand for Anne, the gold itself, worn close to the skin, suggests intimacy, a tangible connection between the personal and the divine. What's striking is how these symbols straddle public and private. Van Eyck's signature winks at viewers, inviting them into the artist's confidence, while Frederick's cipher remains deliberately opaque, a monarch's inside joke. Yet all share a common thread, the belief that names properly encoded could transcend time. Whether etched in paint or stone, they whisper across centuries, a reminder that even in an age of parchment and quills, branding, and the hunger to be remembered was already an art form. In a dimly lit cathedral treasury, a golden arm extends toward visitors, its fingers curled in an eternal blessing. But this is no statue, it's a reliquary designed to hold the bones of a saint, crafted in the very shape of the holy limb it once animated. These containers weren't just storage, they were resurrection in metal and gemstones, reassembling saints' fragmented bodies into shimmering symbols of eternal life. Take the famed arm reliquary of St. Blaise in Brunswick, its silver fingers clutching a candle to honor the saint's miracle of light. Or the bust of St. Yrieix in Limoges, where the saint's hollowed-out skull stares serenely through crystal eyes, his gilded face a promise that death couldn't erase identity. Every curve of these sacred vessels whispered the same truth. The faithful weren't just preserving relics, they were restoring the saints to glory. Material choices carried divine weight. Rock crystal, prized for its transparency and rarity, became the ultimate metaphor for purity, its clarity suggesting untainted holiness, as if the saint's power could shine through unclouded. The reliquary of St. Foy at Conques encases the child martyr's skull behind a crystal pane, turning her remains into a luminous spectacle. Gold, too, spoke volumes. More than just opulence, it represented the incorruptibility of the heavenly realm. When the holy thorn reliquary was fashioned to hold a single spine from Christ's crown, goldsmiths didn't merely ornament it, they encrusted it with rubies to mimic droplets of blood, transforming the container into a miniature Calvary. Even the humblest materials held coded messages. Oak, known for its durability, often formed the core of reliquaries, symbolizing steadfast faith beneath gilded surfaces. Enamel work in vibrant blues and greens mirrored the celestial Jerusalem, while pearls formed around irritants in oysters became allegories for saints who transformed suffering into radiant virtue. The Shasta Notre Dame in Tourne takes this further, its hexagonal shape evoking Solomon's temple, subtly declaring that the relic within was as monumental as biblical history itself. The most ingenious reliquaries played visual tricks. The Monimusc reliquary, small enough to cradle in one hand, mimics the shape of a Celtic house, suggesting the saint's presence as a living inhabitant. Others, like the Trier Arm reliquary, feature tiny windows revealing fragments of bone, offering pilgrims tantalizing glimpses of the sacred while maintaining an aura of mystery. These weren't just decorative choices, they were theological negotiations, how to make the invisible divine tangibly present without reducing it to spectacle. Perhaps no reliquary embodies this balance better than the Shrine of the Three Kings in Cologne. Towering and jewel-encrusted, it doesn't just house the Magi's remains, it reconstructs their journey. Scenes of the Nativity spiral around its sides, while the three sarcophagi inside align at an angle, mirroring the tilt of the Star of Bethlehem. Pilgrims circling the shrine physically reenact the wise men's path, turning veneration into participatory theater. What's astonishing is how these symbols transcended cultures. A crystal reliquary in Paris and a jade one in Beijing might serve similar purposes, both materials chosen for their ability to bridge earthly and heavenly realms. This universal language of form and material reminds us that medieval artisans didn't just craft objects, they engineered encounters with the eternal. And when we stand before these relics today, we're not just seeing history, we're witnessing the moment when hands and faith conspired to make the sacred visible. Tucked away in Yale University's Beinecke Library lies a book that has defied comprehension for centuries, the Voynich manuscript. Its pages, yellowed with age, are filled with looping, unfamiliar script and illustrations so bizarre they seem plucked from a dream. Botanists puzzle over plants that don't match any known species, their roots twisting into impossible shapes. Astronomers trace star charts that map no recognizable constellation. Even the Manuscripts alphabet, a flowing script of elegant yet indecipherable characters, resists every attempt at translation. Carbon dated to the early 15th century, this book is no modern hoax, it's a genuine medieval mystery, a puzzle wrapped in vellum and sealed with time. The illustrations alone are enough to unsettle. One section teems with nude women bathing in interconnected green pools, their bodies oddly elongated, submerged in liquids that seem to flow without gravity. Elsewhere, pages burst with fantastical herbs, leaves like serpents, petals with eyes, stems that spiral into celestial patterns. Some resemble known medicinal plants but mutated, as if drawn from a parallel botany. And then there's the astrological section, concentric circles of stars, some with tiny faces, arranged in configurations that mirror no known sky. These aren't the work of an untalented hand. The draftsmanship is precise, deliberate. Every stroke suggests the artist believed in what they were depicting, whether real or symbolic. But the true enigma is the text. Over 240 pages of tightly packed script, written left to right with no obvious punctuation. Statistical analyses reveal patterns consistent with a real language, word lengths and repetitions that mimic natural speech. Yet no cipher, no Rosetta Stone has cracked its code. Some theories suggest it's an elaborate cipher, a secret alchemical treatise or encoded herbal knowledge. Others propose it's glossolalia, the written equivalent of speaking in tongues, meant to evoke divine revelation rather than convey literal meaning. A few even argue it's an artful forgery, though carbon dating and ink analysis confirm its medieval origin. Theories about its purpose spiral as wildly as its illustrations. Could it be a pharmacopoeia for an unknown tradition, where plants symbolize concepts rather than literal herbs? The balneological section, with its bathing women, has sparked claims it documents a lost wellness ritual, perhaps tied to the mystic green blood of alchemy. The astrological diagrams, with their unplaceable stars, hint at esoteric cosmology, a medieval attempt to map heavens invisible to the naked eye. Or perhaps it's something more intimate, a personal grimoire blending science, magic, and private symbolism, never meant to be understood by others. Ownership traces add another layer. The manuscript resurfaces in the court of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, a ruler obsessed with the occult, who reportedly purchased it for 600 gold ducats, an astronomical sum. Later, it lands in the hands of Jesuit scholars, then vanishes until book dealer Wilfrid Voynich discovers it in 1912, sparking modern fascination. Each custodian left their mark, yet none could read it. What makes the Voynich manuscript so compelling isn't just its resistance to decoding, it's the way it mirrors and distorts medieval symbolism. The bathing women recall purification rituals, yet their green pools defy natural logic. The plants echo herbals of the time, but their mutations suggest allegory, not botany. Even the script, while unique, shares rhythmic qualities with liturgical chants. This isn't random chaos, it's a system, a language of symbols waiting for its grammar. Perhaps the answer lies not in forcing it into known categories, but in accepting its ambiguity. Like a Rorschach test across centuries, it reflects what we bring to it. Linguists see codes, historians see heresy, poets see dreams. And that may be the point. In a world where medieval artists hid meanings in plain sight, the Voynich manuscript could be the ultimate act of artistic encryption, not because it hides secrets, but because it invites us to wonder. 600 years later, its silence still speaks volumes. Carved into the wooden underbellies of choir stalls, where only the weary eyes of clergy might glimpse them, lurk figures that defy the solemnity of their sacred surroundings. Among the most startling is the Sheila Nogiga, a crude, grinning woman clutching her exaggerated vulva wide open. These carvings, tucked beneath the seats of medieval churches from Ireland to Spain, seem jarringly out of place until you recognize their ancient lineage. Far from random vulgarity, Sheilas are folkloric ancestors, pagan symbols of fertility and protection Christianized into grotesque guardians against evil. Their staring eyes and explicit poses weren't scandalous to medieval viewers. They were apotropaic, believed to ward off death and misfortune with the raw power of creation itself. In Kilpeck Church, Herefordshire, a Sheila perches above the doorway like a stone sentinel, her archaic smile challenging centuries of Puritan disapproval. Equally potent are the echoes of the Wild Hunt, that spectral cavalcade of ghostly riders said to storm across winter skies collecting souls, in churches like St. Mary's in Beverley. Misericords depict the hunt's leader, often conflated with Odin or the biblical Gabriel, his horns summoning both the damned and the divine. What's fascinating is how seamlessly this pagan motif was baptized into Christian iconography. The same carving that might have represented Odin's harvest of the dead now illustrated the Last Judgment, its terrifying momentum repurposed as a warning to sinners. At Lund Cathedral in Sweden, a huntsman's face twists into a demonic leer as his hounds tear apart a stag. The scene's violence mirroring medieval visions of hell, yet the stag's antlers, branching like the tree of life, hint at older druidic symbolism. These hybridizations weren't accidents. Medieval artisans, many descended from pagan families, wielded folk memory like a secret language. Green men, faces sprouting leaves from mouths and eyes burst from cathedral capitals, their origins tangled in pre-Christian tree cults. In Tewkesbury Abbey, one peers down beside a carving of Adam and Eve, nature's untamed spirit juxtaposed with the fall. Even the humble hare, frequent star of misericords, carried dual meanings. To some, it symbolized resurrection. Hares were thought to change sex monthly, echoing rebirth. To others, it evoked Celtic shapeshifters or the devil's fleet-footed deceit. The genius of these symbols lies in their mutability. A dragon carved into a baptismal font might represent Satan to a priest, but to a parishioner whose grandparents told Norse sagas, it could evoke Jörmungandr, the world serpent whose coils bound the earth. This duality allowed folk beliefs to survive persecution, camouflaged as church decor. At Clonfert Cathedral in Ireland, a mermaid combs her hair beside biblical scenes, her presence neither explained nor condemned. To the clergy, she might represent the lure of vanity. To locals, she was a mermaid, a benign spirit of nearby rivers. What's astonishing is how these motifs persist. The same Sheila Nogigs, once thought to protect against the evil eye, now grace modern jewelry as feminist icons. The Wild Hunt's thunderous riders inspired everything from Wagner's operas to fantasy novels. These symbols, born in the friction between faiths, remind us that art has always been a negotiation between old gods and new, between the fears of the people and the doctrines of power. And though the hands that carved them are dust, their messages remain, whispering from the margins where folklore and faith collide. A cluster of grapes spills across a medieval banquet scene, their deep purple skins glistening like jewels. But to the medieval eye, this wasn't just a still life. Each plump fruit was a miniature sacrament, a visual echo of the wine consecrated at Mass. In Last Supper depictions, from Giotto's frescoes to the intricate carvings of Spanish retablos, grapes rarely appear alone. They're pressed into chalices, twined around table legs, or held aloft by angels, their juice forever on the verge of becoming sacred. This wasn't mere decoration, it was theological shorthand. Just as Christ declared, "I am the vine," these grapes rooted the divine in the tangible, transforming every painted bunch into a promise of redemption. Yet grapes shared the table with another potent symbol, the pomegranate. Split open in countless Annunciation scenes, its ruby seeds bursting forth like droplets of blood, this fruit carried layers of meaning. Medieval bestiaries claimed its seeds numbered 365, one for each day of the year, making it an emblem of cyclical renewal. In the Belles Heuras of Jean de Berry, a pomegranate tree shades the resurrected Christ, its fruit symbolizing both the sweetness of salvation and the unity of the Church, the seeds bound within a single rind. Even its crown-like calyx wasn't arbitrary. It subtly paralleled Christ's crown of thorns, a reminder that resurrection sprang from suffering. Banquet scenes hid deeper codes still. A loaf of bread broken at a feast wasn't just sustenance, its jagged edges mirrored the fissures in Christ's tomb. The Hours of Catherine of Cleves shows a wedding banquet where fish, not fowl, take center stage. This wasn't a dietary preference. Fish were ancient Christian symbols, their Greek acronym Ichthys spelling Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Even the humble apple, often clutched by the Christ child in Madonna paintings, wasn't solely about Eden's fall. Its roundness echoed the world, its stem a miniature cross, transforming it from forbidden fruit to cosmic redemption. Regional variations abounded. In Mediterranean art, figs dripped with sensual and spiritual significance. Their sticky sweetness evoked divine wisdom, while their leaves whispered of Adam and Eve's shame. Northern artists favored cherries, their blood-red juice symbolizing martyrdom, as in Van der Weyden's Crucifixion, where a finch, another soul symbol, perches on a branch laden with them. Salt, too, held power. In the Arnolfini portrait, a single crystal saltshaker sits prominently on the shelf, a nod to purity and covenant, but also a silent rebuttal of the era's superstitions that spilling salt invited the devil. The most subversive food symbols lurked in marginalia. A snail crawling across a banquet table in the Luttrell Psalter might seem whimsical, but paired with a nearby overturned wine cup, it hinted at gluttony's slow corruption. At St. George's Chapel in Windsor, a misericord carving shows a fox stealing a goose from a feast, a thinly veiled jab at clergy exploiting their flock's offerings. These edible motifs were more than aesthetic choices, they were a visual liturgy. A grapevine winding through a stained glass window, a pomegranate studding a king's scepter, even the honeycomb patterning a saint's halo, each was a syllable in a silent sermon. And though the banquets they adorned have long crumbled to dust, their meanings linger, waiting to be tasted anew. The flowing blue robes of the Wilton diptych's angels aren't just a feast for the eyes, they're a meticulously crafted moral statement. Every fold of that luminous ultramarine fabric, every gilded hem, whispers a tale of celestial hierarchy and divine virtue. This wasn't arbitrary elegance. Medieval artists draped their figures with intentional symbolism, turning garments into visual sermons. Blue, as we've seen, was heaven's hue, a pigment so costly it signaled the Virgin Mary's elevated status. But the angels' tightly cinched belts and high collars carried equal weight, embodying modesty so absolute it transcended earthly fashion. Compare these to the devil's rags in contemporaneous works, tattered and mismatched, often in garish reds, and the message is clear: clothing mirrored the soul's state. Yet fabric could deceive. The Tres Riches Heuras du Duc de Berry portrays nobles in fur-trimmed splendor, their sleeves so extravagantly long they drag on the ground, a deliberate flaunting of wealth that preachers condemned as the sin of superfluity. Ecclesiastical texts warned that such excess choked the spirit like ivy smothering an oak, but artists layered their critiques subtly. In the Boucicaut master's Annunciation, the Virgin's simple white gown lacks ornamentation, while the visiting angels robe those celestial flows with restrained grace. The real brilliance lies in the negative space, the absence of embroidery, the lack of ostentatious dyes, framing humility as the ultimate luxury. Accessories spoke volumes. A belt wasn't just functional, its placement on the body mapped morality. The Speculum Virginum, a guide for nuns, instructed that belts should sit at the waist, not slung low like a courtesan's, nor tight enough to accentuate curves. In the St. Wolfgang Altarpiece, the saint's plain leather girdle contrasts starkly with the gilded, gem-encrusted one worn by the temptress beside him, her dangling purse echoing the weight of worldly cares. Even shoes carried coded meaning. Pointed toes, fashionable among 14th century elites, were branded poulains in sermons, literally devil's claws, and depicted in manuscripts poking suggestively from under sinners' robes. The most subversive sartorial symbols hid in plain sight. The lutral psalter marginalia teems with inverted fashion satire, a monkey wearing a bishop's mitre, a hare sporting knightly spurs. These weren't just jokes, they exposed how easily sacred symbols could be hollowed out by vanity. Conversely, the Rohan Hours shows Mary Magdalene in her infamous scarlet dress, but after her conversion, the same garment appears faded, its once vibrant dye washed clean by penitence. What's striking is how these visual rules crossed class boundaries. A peasant's coarse wool tunic in a Book of Hours might be patched yet spotless, signaling honest labor, while a merchant's fur-lined cotehardie could drip with ambiguous tension, worldly success balanced against spiritual risk. The Arnolfini portrait captures this duality perfectly. The green of Giovanni's wife's gown represents fertility, but its excessive fabric requiring enough dye to bankrupt a lesser family whispers of hubris. Clothing's power wasn't just in what it showed, but what it concealed. The merrowed altarpiece's Joseph, relegated to the background, wears muted browns, his cloak's folds swallowing his form, visually enacting his humble retreat from the sacred drama. Meanwhile, the resurrected Christ in Isenheim altarpiece shimmers in a loincloth so starkly white it seems to emit light, the fabric's simplicity underscoring divine transcendence over mortal vanity. These weren't just artistic choices, they were wearable theologies. When a medieval viewer saw the Virgin's mantle enveloping supplicants in the Madonna of Mercy, they understood the metaphor instantly, spiritual protection woven into every thread. And in an era where sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what, these painted garments became more than symbols. They were battle lines in the eternal struggle between the earthly and the divine. Imagine unrolling a medieval map and finding not just coastlines and cities, but a swirling vortex of sacred history and monstrous wonders. The Hereford Mappa Mundi, one of the most stunning survivors from the 13th century, doesn't chart geography as we know it, it weaves an entire cosmology onto calfskin. At its heart sits Jerusalem, rendered as a perfect circle, the navel of the world where Christ's crucifixion anchored human history. Radiating outward are continents warped by theology, Europe and Africa crammed into the margins, while the Garden of Eden floats bizarrely at the top, severed from the rest of the world by a ring of fire. This wasn't cartographic ignorance, it was spiritual GPS, plotting humanity's journey from fall to redemption in ink and gold. What's truly mesmerizing are the creatures lurking at the edges. Beyond the Nile's serpentine curve, a tribe of headless blemmies stare from their chests, while scaly cyopods hoist their single giant foot like living umbrellas. These weren't fantasy inventions, they were lifted straight from Pliny the Elder's natural history, ancient evidence of God's boundless creativity. To medieval viewers, these beings served a dual purpose. They marked the limits of the known world while reinforcing Christendom's centrality. If monsters prowled the fringes, surely salvation lay at the center, where Jerusalem's walls shimmered like a beacon. Distance on these maps wasn't measured in miles but meaning. The route from London to Rome might squish or stretch based on its spiritual significance, while biblical events elbowed their way onto the landscape. On the Ebstorf map, a vast destroyed masterpiece, Christ's body literally enfolds the world, his hands piercing the edges near Spain and Arabia, his head cradling paradise. Every river becomes a vein, every mountain a bone, turning geography into anatomy divine. Even directional conventions carried symbolic weight. East, not north, crowned most Mappi Mundi, aligning with sunrise and Eden's placement. This orientation made the maps liturgical objects, their top honoring the risen sun. Meanwhile, south crouched at the bottom, its scorched deserts housing Satan's domain. The Hereford map labels this infernal zone with ominous clarity. Here are dragons, here is fire, here is the home of hell, yet these maps weren't static. Marginal notes reveal constant revision, pilgrims adding hometowns, scribes scribbling newfound marvels like Marco Polo's rhinoceros. The Cantino planisphere smuggled Brazilian coastlines into churchly frameworks, proving even sacred geography couldn't resist the tide of exploration. What lingers isn't their inaccuracy, but their audacity. These were maps of the soul as much as the soil, where every city, beast, and sea told a story. To trace their lines today isn't just to navigate the past, it's to witness an entire civilization wrestling with its place in creation, one monstrous margin at a time. From the green man's leafy grin to the sly fox preaching to geese, medieval art teams with symbols daring us to decode them. These weren't mere decorations, they were a visual language, a way for artists to whisper secrets under the watchful eyes of kings and bishops. Think of the pelican piercing its own breast, a startling metaphor for sacrifice, or the lamb holding a banner of victory, its innocent face belying its power as a stand-in for Christ himself. Even colors spoke volumes. Ultramarine blue, crushed from Afghan lapis lazuli, wasn't just a pigment. It was divinity made visible, reserved for the Virgin's robes to mark her as heaven's bridge. The genius of these symbols lies in their layers. A rose could be romantic, sacred, and political all at once, its petals unfolding like Mary's purity, its thorns hinting at Christ's suffering, its red hue echoing Florence's civic pride. Gargoyles weren't just drain spouts, they were stone guardians, their grotesque faces designed to scare off evil spirits as fiercely as they diverted rain. And who could forget the Voynich manuscript, its pages a labyrinth of unreadable script and impossible plants, still taunting scholars centuries later. This was art as a puzzle box, every brushstroke and chisel mark a potential clue. A snail in a manuscript margin might critique greedy moneylenders, while a lute in an angel's hands could symbolize the harmony of the spheres. Even food on a banquet table carried coded messages. Grapes weren't just fruit but echoes of the Eucharist, their juice forever on the verge of becoming sacred wine. So here's your challenge. Next time you stand before an old painting or trace your fingers along a cathedral's carving, lean in closer. That odd detail in the corner, that peculiar animal tucked into the foliage, what might it be hiding? The Middle Ages left us a treasure map in plain sight, and the thrill is in the hunt. Dive into the comments and tell me which symbol captivated you the most. Was it the defiant Sheila Nogig grinning from church walls, or the alchemist's Ouroboros swallowing its tail in an eternal loop? The past is whispering. Are you listening?